The Hidden Temple in Montana. I am shocked I have never seen this mentioned on X or really at all online, but there are ruins in Montana that are really out of place. The area is or was guarded by the US military or black trucks claiming that the site is a missile site, but in reality the locals all know what is there. I will green text my experience the one time we went hiking and didn't encounter any G-men. Be 14 years old living in Billings, grandparents live in Yaak, Montana. One summer during the second Bush administration, my parents sent me up to Yaak to spend some weeks with my grandparents and cousins. The first few days, it's rough going on my grandparents' farm dealing with basically living off-grid, no Game Boy and no Xbox. My cousins were older and treated me fine, but my chores mid-summer made me exhausted and stressed. One day my cousins asked me if I wanted to go four-wheeling with them and my grandpa. I agreed, and we head off in two trucks with the ATVs and trailer headed northwest. I forgot how long we traveled, but we eventually arrived at the trailhead. My three cousins and Grandpa all had ATVs. I had to ride bitch with my cousin Simon. Grandpa told us assertively to stay on the trails as there was grizzlies in the area foraging, but they tend to stay away from the trails due to the noise. We set out, the four of us, with Grandpa at the lead. I remember how beautifully everything was heading down the trails. After a few hours, we stopped at a small lake and had lunch, laughing and joking. In the distance, we could see Garver Mountain. Grandpa told us about the secret military base hidden in the mountain. As a kid, I thought of games like Halo, full of super soldiers fighting aliens. Cousins were enamored by the idea. Grandpa warned them of the black helicopters and vans that arrested people for getting too close. My cousins agreed not to head in that direction, but I knew they were lying. We packed up and set off to head back to the trucks, Grandpa again in the lead. About an hour into the drive, I realized my cousins aren't following Grandpa and heading towards the mountain. I yelled to Simon asking him if this was a good idea. He assured me it would be great. Eventually we hit a fence with some warning signs telling us to stay out. We traveled for about 20 more minutes through some thick forest until we reached a break in the fence. The break was big enough to ride through. I remember the screech of the fencing against the sides of the four-wheeler. We traveled down the valley for a bit as a river ran near the mountain. Eventually we see some columns next to trees, old ones that kinda looked Egyptian. Diagram enclosed, 500 hours in Photoshop. We stopped and got on foot looking around, realizing that we passed through a large ruined building. We started exploring the grounds. There were carvings of bird people everywhere. They were simple and looked like humans with bird heads and long legs. Other carvings included circles and triangles in odd patterns. My cousins were laughing about how awesome this all was and that they felt like Indiana Jones. We approached the main building and it was massive but overgrown. There were old boxes everywhere with army stuff stamped all on the outside, and rusted generators and equipment in the center. I was nervous. I wanted to leave, but my cousins continued on into the main building. More bird people carvings everywhere, and a massive stone pillar in the center. At that point, we hear a helicopter echoing through the valley. My cousins joke that it's the men in black and we should run. This freaked me out and I started crying as we ran back to the ATVs. We peeled out of the site and headed back towards the hole in the fence. My cousins were laughing while I was crying. Waiting for us at the hole were two big black SUVs, which I thought odd considering how thick the forest was. Overhead, I could hear helicopters. Sounded like more than one. The guys waiting for us had guns drawn and were wearing normal clothes, like the operator guy from the K memes. They arrested us and brought us to a ranger station where we stayed for a day in a small cabin attached to the building. My cousins were freaked out and asked for help, but every time they were told to shut up by the men outside the door. Eventually my grandpa showed up and told us we were all going home. No one spoke to us as we left. The ATVs were gone, and the other truck we drove was gone too. My grandpa said that they took them and never to talk about this again. The entire drive home was quiet. When we got to my grandparents, my grandma was crying and hugged us. They told us to never talk about this to anyone, and if anyone asked, we broke down in the woods and my grandpa rescued us. We never talked about it with each other or my grandparents, and certainly never to my parents. About a year later in school, I overheard someone talking to another kid about the hidden temple in the Kootenai forest. I asked him about it, and he recounted a story about how his dad and grandpa found the same place while hunting one winter. The kid described things perfectly. Fearing the government, guys, I told him to never talk about it. Even now I'm a bit uneasy discussing this. I'm not sure if anyone else has ever been up there. I tried using Google Earth and other providers to try to find it, but no luck. I am not sure if the trees cover everything up or if the government edits things like that out. Similarly, searching online pulls up nothing. I'll never forget the birdmen carvings and all the odd shapes carved into the weathered rock.